She had 90 seconds, maybe less. Josie Kearns took the corner of the 18th floor hallway at a dead run, still in her delivery jacket, car keys clenched in her fist so hard the metal had cut a line into her palm. Behind her, somewhere back near the elevators, a man's voice was saying her name. He wasn't shouting. That was the worst part. He never shouted where people could hear him. He said it the way you'd call a dog you were certain would come, patient and reasonable and warm. And anyone listening would think, what a decent man. And she was the only person alive who knew what that voice meant once a door had closed. She'd cleaned this floor for 2 years. She knew every door on it. She pushed the first one that gave, shut it behind her, and put her back flat against it in the dark, one hand pressed over her own mouth, trying to make her lungs go quiet enough for him to walk past. Footsteps, slowing, stopping, then moving on. And that was when Josie Kearns realized she wasn't alone in the room. She hadn't heard breathing. She hadn't heard a chair move. She simply became aware. The way you become aware that the weather has changed, that somewhere in that unlit space another person was sitting perfectly still and had listened to every single thing she'd just done. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known while she was pressed against that door counting footsteps, was that the entire 18th floor had been closed to outside guests that night. She didn't know the door she'd chosen wasn't a guest room. She didn't know whose room it was. And she didn't know that the man in the chair by the window had put the lights out himself 20 minutes earlier, or that in all the years since he'd buried someone he loved, he'd kept exactly one rule about strangers, and she had just walked straight through it. If a story like this makes you want to hear more, hit that like button, share it with someone you think would want to listen, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's go back to that dark room on the 18th floor, and to the first thing a voice said out of the dark. "You can stop holding your breath," the voice said. "He's gone. And that jacket you're wearing has a reflective stripe across the back, which means you've been visible to me since the door opened, so you might as well stand up straight." It came from the far side of the room, low and dry and entirely unhurried, the voice of a man who had not moved and did not intend to. Josie's eyes were beginning to sort shapes out of the darkness, and she found him where the sound had come from. A large man sitting in a chair by the window with the city glowing behind him, one leg crossed over the other, as still as furniture. "I'm not hiding," she said, and was faintly amazed that her voice came out level. "I'm waiting for something to be over." That's a very generous way to describe a man walking a hallway calling your name. It's the way I'd like to describe it. Fair enough. He shifted. Barely. "Then let me tell you why I'm hiding, since you're too proud to admit that you are. Downstairs there are 200 people I'm expected to shake hands with, a band that has played the same 4 songs since 7 o'clock, and my grandmother, who has spent the entire evening walking respectable young women past me, one at a time, the way a man walks livestock past a buyer. I turned the lights off in here myself. I sat down in this chair with the specific intention of being left alone until midnight." He paused, and then a woman in a delivery jacket came through the door like the building was on fire. "So one of us has ruined the other's evening, and I'm not entirely sure yet which one of us it is." Out in the corridor, a door opened somewhere and closed again, and Josie went rigid without meaning to. And she knew he'd seen it, because the quality of the silence changed. "That's not a stranger out there," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. Nobody flinches like that at a stranger. Strangers are frightening in a general way. That was specific. That was a woman who knows exactly how many steps that man takes to cross a room. He let it sit. And he wasn't shouting, which is the part I find interesting. Men who shout are men who've lost control of something. Men who use that voice, patient and warm and reasonable, in a hallway, at that hour. They haven't lost control of anything. They're just waiting for you to remember that you have nowhere else to go. Josie stood in the dark with her back against the door, and her keys still cutting into her hand, and she understood that she had perhaps 30 seconds before she either told this man the truth or spent the rest of her life explaining it to herself. "I opened the wrong box tonight," she said. "That's all. I was looking for something else, on the top shelf of a closet, and I opened the wrong box. And I read what was inside it, and now I'm not going home." She heard how thin it sounded. "That's the whole of it. I'm not going to make it longer than that. I've got 2 more deliveries in the truck, and I don't have the time to be a story." "That," the man said, "is the least self-pitying account of a ruined life I've ever heard, and I've heard a number of them." And then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached over and turned on a single lamp beside the chair, a small one, and the room came halfway into being, and he said, "Come stand over here where the light is." "Why?" "Because scandal lives in the dark. It doesn't live in what happens. It lives in what a thing looks like when the door opens. Right now, you're a woman flattened against a door in an unlit room. Move 8 feet to your left, and you're a woman standing in a lit room, talking to a man who's still sitting down. He said it the way another man might read out a weather report. If someone comes through that door in the next minute, and I think someone will, I'd rather we both be boring. She crossed the carpet because it was the first sensible thing anyone had said to her all night, and she stopped where the lamplight reached, and she looked at him properly for the first time. He was younger than the voice had suggested, dark-haired, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a suit that had not come off a rack, and he watched her come with an expression of mild and total attention, as though nothing in his life had ever been urgent. And somewhere underneath the noise in her chest, a small, cold thought surfaced and stood up. At the start of her shift, downstairs, she had handed a bag to a guest in the lobby, and the security man by the elevators had lowered his voice and told her not to take anything up to the 18th floor tonight, because one family had booked the entire thing. The door opened without a knock, the way a man opens a door in a house he believes belongs to him, and Brett Halloran came through it already mid-sentence, saying, "Josie, honey, you've worked yourself up over nothing. Just come down and we'll..." And then the sound went out of him all at once, like a radio unplugged. He'd seen the man in the chair. He did the arithmetic that every man in Providence eventually does, taking in the suit and the stillness and the fact that the room had been dark, and Josie watched the color leave his face in stages, from the jaw upward. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm looking for my wife." "You've found her," the man in the chair said. "She's standing right there. Now stop looking for her." He didn't get up. He didn't raise his voice. He uncrossed his legs. That was all. And something about the small movement filled the room. "Halloran," he said, "you sell commercial policies out of the office on Weybosset Street. Or you did until recently. You've got a car loan you're 2 payments behind on. And you owe a man in Cranston who doesn't put things in writing, which is a foolish thing for an insurance man to do, because he of all people should understand what an unsecured debt does to a household." He said it the way a man reads out a grocery list. "I don't say this to frighten you. I say it so you understand what business I'm in. I know who owes what in this city. It's not a talent. It's simply my work, the way selling policies was yours." Brett's mouth moved before anything came out of it. "That's, sir, with respect, that's private. It stopped being private when you walked a hotel corridor at midnight saying a woman's name where 200 people could hear you. But we can leave that." The man in the chair looked at him then, properly, for the first time. "Here's the part that matters. A few minutes ago, your wife told me something about some papers with her name on them. I haven't checked it. I want you to hear me say that clearly, because I don't accuse men of things I haven't verified, and I've had no reason yet to verify anything about you, so I'll check in the morning. That's all. I'll make one phone call before breakfast, and I'll know whether what she told me is true." He let a breath of silence go by. "And if it is true, then tonight is the last night you sleep easy. Not because I'll do anything to you. I won't touch you, and I won't need to. It's just that you'll spend every night after this one wondering what I found. And there is no worse thing I could do to a man than that." Brett stood there a moment longer, and whatever he'd come upstairs to do had gone out of him, and he turned and went. And if he had simply gone, everything that followed would have been different. But at the threshold he stopped, and he looked back at Josie, and he said it in the old voice. The soft one, the reasonable one, the one that had worked on her for years. "I'll leave the porch light on for you," he said. "Come home whenever you're ready, sweetheart. I'm not angry." And then he was gone down the hall, and the door drifted half open behind him, and Josie stood in the lamplight with her arms wrapped around herself, and the man in the chair sat very still and looked at the empty doorway for a long moment, and Josie would think about that moment for the rest of her life, because she understood later that it was the moment he decided, because he had heard it. He had heard that a court paper wouldn't stop that voice, that no order signed by a judge on a Tuesday would keep that man from leaving a porch light on and waiting, patient as weather, for a woman with no money and no place to sleep to run out of other options. He stood up. He was taller than the chair had suggested. "How many deliveries did you say were still in the truck?" 2. "They'll keep." He crossed to the door and opened it the rest of the way, and gestured her through, and they came out of the dark room into the corridor, and straight into the party, because that was the direction the elevators lay, and there was no other way down, and the party saw them. A cluster of guests in the doorway of the ballroom saw them, and a woman who wrote a column about who had been seen with whom saw them, and at the center of the room, in a chair she had clearly refused to leave all evening, an old woman with a cane and a face like a closed fist saw them, and her eyebrows climbed. He did not slow down. He walked Josie the length of that room, past every one of those people, at an unhurried pace, and he stopped in front of the old woman and said, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry to the walls, "Grandmother, this is Josie Kearns. I want you to remember her face." The old woman's chin lifted. "As of tonight," he said, "anyone who makes trouble for her is making trouble for me." That was all. He didn't say the word wife, and he didn't say the word engaged, and he didn't say anything at all that a man could later be held to. He simply turned and walked her to the elevator, and behind them, the room did what rooms do. And by the time the doors closed, 200 people had already finished the sentence for him. The elevator carried them down in silence, and it wasn't until they were standing in the empty service corridor behind the lobby, where the carpet gave way to concrete, and the noise of the party was only a vibration in the walls, that Josie turned on him. "Do you have any idea what you just did to me?" "I have a fair idea." "No, you don't, because you've never had to live in a room after other people have decided what you are." Her voice was shaking, and she let it shake. "An hour ago, I walked out of a life where a man made every decision about me, and then told me it was for my own good. And he was gentle about it, and he was reasonable about it. And it took me years to understand that gentle and reasonable are the two most dangerous words in the English language when a man is holding the checkbook. I got out of that tonight, and I'm not going to walk into another version of it before my shift is even over, no matter how much better the suit is." He listened to all of it without moving, which she would come to learn was simply what he did. "I understand you're angry," he said, "and I'm not going to tell you shouldn't be, but you should be angry about the right thing. I didn't decide anything about you. I said one sentence, and the sentence was that anyone who makes trouble for you makes trouble for me. That's a fact about me. It isn't a claim about you. That is not what those people heard. No, it isn't." He put his hands in his pockets. "They heard something else, and they'll say something else. And by tomorrow afternoon it will have grown. I'm aware of that. I could have stood in the middle of that room and corrected them. I chose not to. That's the piece you're entitled to be angry about. So let me tell you why I made it, and then you can decide what you want to do." He held up one finger, and there was nothing theatrical in it, only the habit of a man who thought in order. "First, that man is going to be on your street tonight with the porch light on, and there is nothing on this earth I could have handed you in the next 12 hours that would stop him. Not a lawyer, not a piece of paper, not a police report. Because none of those things work at 2 in the morning when a woman has nowhere else to sleep. My name works at 2 in the morning. It's an ugly thing to say out loud, and it's true. And tonight it happened to be the only wall I could build between you and him before sunrise. A second finger. Second, you'll tell me I know nothing about you. And you'll be right about the facts, and wrong about the substance. I've spent 15 minutes with you in the dark, in a crisis. That's worth more than a year of polite dinners. Because at a dinner a person performs, and in a crisis a person can't. In 15 minutes I watched you refuse to cry, refuse to explain, refuse to make yourself the heroine of your own story, and tell a total stranger the humiliating truth in 4 sentences, and then apologize for taking up his time. I don't know your history. I know how you behave when you're cornered, and that's the only part I've ever found useful. A third, and this one matters most. The door is yours, not mine. Whatever this becomes, you end it whenever you want, and you don't owe me a reason, and I'll make certain the ending costs you nothing. If you want to walk out of this corridor tonight and never see me again, my driver will take you anywhere in New England, and no one will follow you." Josie stood with her back against the cold wall and looked at him for a long time. "Then I have conditions," she said. "Good. 1. I never take money from you. Not a gift, not a loan, not an account, not a car. If I take money from a man again, I'll have learned nothing, and I would rather be broke and stupid than comfortable and stupid." He nodded once. 2. You don't fix anything without asking me first. Not one thing. I don't care how small it is or how much easier it would make my week. Agreed. 3. Nobody performs. Not you, not me. You be exactly as cold and difficult as you actually are, and I'll be as blunt and unmanageable as I actually am, and we find out what's still standing when neither of us is pretending. That one I'll enjoy. 4. She lifted her chin. I keep all 3 of my jobs, and for the first time that night, he didn't answer right away. "No," he said, "that isn't a condition. That's a woman running herself into the ground at 3 separate wages so she doesn't have to admit she needs anything. And I've watched better people than me do it, and I know exactly where it ends. You just agreed you wouldn't fix things without asking." "I'm asking. The answer is no." "Then we're at an impasse," he said, "and I'd rather leave it there honestly than settle it dishonestly tonight." And they left it there, unfinished, sitting between them in that concrete corridor, and neither of them said another word about it for a very long time. She didn't move into his house. She took the driver as far as a diner on Broad Street, and no farther. And by the end of that week, she had a furnished room above a dry cleaner near the Cranston line, paid in cash, 1 month down, the kind of place where the radiator knocked all night, and the landlady wanted references she couldn't give. It lasted 5 days. The landlady handed back the envelope without opening it, and said the room had been promised to a nephew, and would not look at her while she said it. The second place lasted 2 days. The third took her money on a Thursday, called on Saturday, and said there had been a mistake with the paperwork. And when Josie asked what kind of mistake, the woman said she wasn't at liberty, and hung up. Nobody threatened her. That was the thing she kept coming back to as she sat in the truck outside a laundromat, with her bag on the passenger seat, and the heater blowing cold. Nobody put a hand on her. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody said a single word she could have written down and shown to anyone. They simply took the floor out from under her, one board at a time, politely, and left her standing on nothing. And then on Monday night, she came out of a delivery and found the truck sitting lower on one side, and the valve stem on the front tire had been unscrewed and taken. Not slashed, not cut, taken, which meant somebody had knelt down beside her vehicle with a small tool and unhurried hands, and left everything else untouched. She sat in the driver's seat for a long while with her hands on the wheel. Then she drove to Newport on the spare. It was nearly midnight when she came up the drive, and she didn't rehearse it. And when he came to the door himself in shirt sleeves, she said it before she was over the threshold. "I need to ask you one thing, and I need you to answer it fast. Did you do it?" "Do what?" 3 rooms in 3 weeks. Nobody says why. Then somebody unscrews a valve stem off my truck and takes it with them. She was shaking, and not from cold. "Because if it's you, if this is how you get a woman to move into your house, then I'm leaving the state tonight and you'll never find out where I went. I've been managed before. I know what it feels like from the inside, and this feels exactly like it." He stood there and let her finish, and then he said, "No. Say more than that. It wasn't me. And I'll tell you how you can know it wasn't me. Because you shouldn't take my word for anything yet." He stepped back to let her in. "If I'd wanted you here, I'd have had someone offer you a job with a room attached and let you think you'd earned it. That's how it's done. Taking a valve stem is a message, and I don't send messages to people I want." He was quiet a moment. "But I'll tell you the part you won't like. That is my family's method. Not the tire, the rooms, making a place inhospitable without ever touching the person standing in it. Somebody used my house's way of doing things without asking my permission, and I don't yet know who, and I'm not going to guess in front of you." She came in. She stood in the hall and looked around her, and what she noticed wasn't the size of it or the silence of it, but something smaller and worse. "There isn't a single dent in any of these chairs," she said. He turned. "I've cleaned houses for 2 years, and you learn to read a room by where people actually sit. Cushions go soft, arms get worn. There's always one chair somebody ruined because it's the one they love." She looked at him. "There's nothing like that here. Not one. Nobody has ever sat down in this house because they wanted to." And Elias Marchetti stood in his own hallway and found that he had no answer at all, and was still finding none when a voice came from the room behind him. An older man's voice, unhurried and heavy. "So this is her." Rocco Marchetti came out into the light, and he was near 60, and built like a man who had once carried things for a living. And he looked at Josie the way a man looks at a hairline crack in a hull. He didn't lower his voice for her benefit. "You went to a party to get out of a room," he said to his nephew, "and you came home with an opening. She's a defendant in an active case. Her husband's talking to lawyers, and you've walked her through your front door in front of the whole city." He shifted his weight. "I'm not saying she's a bad woman. I'm saying she's an opening. And you've never in your life been able to tell the difference between those two things. And the worst part," Josie thought, standing there with her bag still in her hand, "was that he wasn't wrong. She took a room at the back of the house, and paid for it, the only way she'd accept, by taking over the kitchen. And she ate at the kitchen table, because that was where the people were. And within a week, the cook had stopped setting a place for her anywhere else. And within 2 weeks, a driver and a man who did the grounds had started sitting down at the far end of that table with their coffee, saying almost nothing, staying longer each day. She didn't move a stick of furniture. She simply used the house, which nobody had done in a very long time, and the house began to fill in behind her like water finding a low place. It was on a Thursday morning, carrying a tray back down the hall, that she came to the open doorway of the dining room and stopped. There were 4 men in there and Elias, and she saw the thing she would never quite be able to unsee, which was that not one of those men sat down until he did. They stood behind their chairs like boys at assembly, and when he finally sat, they sat. And the sound of it was one sound. She should have kept walking. She didn't. One of the four had taken money. She understood that much from the papers spread out between them, from a boatyard down in the harbor, over a long stretch of time, in amounts small enough to be missed, and steady enough to be deliberate. He was a heavy man in a good coat, and he was already explaining before anyone asked him to. Elias let him finish. Then he said, "You'll keep the house. You'll keep the boat. Your daughter's tuition is paid through the spring and I won't touch it. I'm not taking $1 off you." He folded his hands. "Starting tomorrow morning, nobody in 3 states takes your phone call. That's all. That's the whole of it." And the man began to beg. He begged in a way Josie had never heard a grown man beg, not loudly, saying the same 4 or 5 things over and over as though one of them might catch, saying he had people, saying he had been at the funeral, saying he'd known Elias's father. And Elias listened to all of it with his hands folded and his face entirely still. And then he stood up and walked out of the room without answering, and passed within 3 feet of her in the hallway, and did not look at her, and she flattened herself against the wall with the tray in her hands, and found that her heart was going like a bird's. She was afraid of him, not startled, afraid. The way you're afraid standing near an animal that has been calm every time you've seen it, and could stop being calm. She stood there a long time after the men had gone, and then she put the tray down and went out the back of the house because she needed air, and she kept walking past the lawn and past the wall until she came to the glass house. Half the panes were gone. Grass had come up through the joints in the floor, and the door didn't hang right. Inside, in the wreck of it, somebody had kept perhaps a dozen things alive, in a narrow row down the middle, and at the end of the row was a lemon tree in a cracked clay pot, tall as her shoulder, dark green, healthy, bearing nothing. An old man was standing over it with a watering can. He was well past the age when a man should be lifting anything, and he watched her come without much interest, the way people watch weather. "It doesn't fruit," he said. "It hasn't in years, but it doesn't die either, so I keep on. How long have you been out here?" "Longer than I care to say." "What's your name?" And he stopped. He actually stopped, with the can still tilted, and she watched him take a second to find it, and something in her chest went sideways. "Brody," he said at last. "Walter Brody." "Walt." Josie put her hand out, and he shifted the can to his other side and shook it, and his palm was like bark. And she asked him what the row of plants at the far end was. And he told her, and she asked him what he'd done to keep the tree going through the winters with the pains gone. And he told her that too, at length, in the manner of a man who has waited a very long time to be asked. And while he was still talking, she reached out and touched one of the leaves. And then she was crying. She didn't make a sound about it. She stood in a ruined glass house with her hand on a lemon tree and cried. And old Walt Brody looked at her for a moment, and then looked away and went on watering, and neither of them said one word about it. She found them on a Sunday, looking for a stapler. The drawer in the small room off the kitchen was full of the ordinary paper a house generates, and underneath it, held together with a black clip, was a stack of delivery receipts, the flimsy carbon kind her company printed, and she pulled one out because she recognized the form, and then she stopped recognizing anything at all. It was hers. The address was one of his restaurants, off Atwell's. The time was 11:15 at night, and underneath it was another one, the following week, same address, same hour, and another, and another. She went through the whole stack standing up, and every single receipt in it carried her route number and her handwriting, going back months, well back past the night on the 18th floor, and by the time she reached the bottom, she had gone cold all the way down. She found him in the study and put the stack on the desk in front of him. "Explain this to me," she said, "and don't be careful about it. If you were watching me, say so now and I'll be gone before supper." He looked at the top receipt for a moment, then he pushed it back toward her. "I didn't know your name until you told it to me in a dark room," he said. "That's the truth, and it's the whole of it. But I'll tell you what I did know, and you're not going to like the shape of it either." He sat back. "Every one of my places has a man on it at night. It's not for show. The one at that restaurant files something in writing at the end of each week, and it's mostly nothing. And about 4 or 5 months ago, the nothing included a line about a woman who drove the late delivery run. He'd noticed that she handed off the bags and got back into her truck, and then sat in the lot for 10 minutes without moving before she pulled out. Every week. The same 10 minutes. Josie didn't say anything. "So I asked why," he said. "Not because of you. Because a vehicle sitting in one of my lots for 10 minutes at 11 at night is a thing I want a reason for, and I assumed the reason was somebody was using my parking lot for something." He went and found out, and what he came back with was that nobody was using anything. She just sat there, and nobody could tell me why. and I couldn't get an answer that satisfied me. He tapped the edge of the desk once, so I moved that run. I had the late delivery window shifted forward an hour, so it fell inside the shift when there's a man standing in the lot instead of watching a screen. That's the entire extent of it. I never asked for a name. I never asked what she looked like. I moved a delivery time because a woman was sitting alone in the dark in a place I'm responsible for, and I couldn't work out why. He looked up. I did that before the party. Weeks before. The room was very quiet. Josie stood with her hands flat on the desk and looked at the stack of her own handwriting, and she found that her throat had closed, and it took her a while to get it open again. "I'll tell you why," she said. "You didn't ask. I'm asking. It's not 10 minutes because anything happened in the lot." She heard her voice come out thin and let it. "It's 10 minutes because that run was the last one. After that, there's nowhere to go except home." She stopped and started again. "You get used to a lot of things. You get used to the way a house feels when you come in and you can't tell yet from the hallway what kind of night it's going to be. And I found out that if I sat in the truck for a little while first, with the engine off, I could have 10 minutes that belonged to me before I had to go and find out." She pressed her palms harder into the wood. "That's all it was. That's what your man was writing down. A woman running out the clock in a parking lot because she didn't want to drive home." Elias Marchetti sat with his hands on the arms of the chair and did not move and did not speak. And outside the window, the light went off the water and the room went gray around them. And after a while, Josie gathered up the receipts and squared the edges of them and put them back in the drawer where she'd found them. And neither of them said anything else about it that day, or for a long time after. He was standing beside her truck in the parking garage, under the office tower on Dorrance Street, when she came down the ramp with the empty bag over her shoulder, and he had his hands out where she could see them, and he'd lost weight. "Don't run," Brett Halloran said. "Please, I'm not going to come any closer than this. Look, I'm staying right here by the pillar. You've got 12 feet and the whole ramp behind you." And he stayed there. And that was the part that frightened her. Because a man who shouts is a man you can call the police about, and a man who stands very still, 12 feet away, with his hands out, and his voice pitched soft, is a man who has thought about how this will look. "I lost the job," he said, 2 weeks ago, "and the lawyer wants a retainer up front, which I don't have, because you know exactly what's in that account." He laughed a little, the old laugh, rueful and warm. "Josie, come on, it's me. It's been 6 years of me. I'm not the man they're describing. Don't. I'm not asking you to come home. I want you to hear that. I'm not asking for that." He shifted his weight. "I'm asking you not to give them the statement. That's all. That one piece of paper. Everything else can go however it goes, and I'll take whatever's coming. But that one thing puts a number on it. And once there's a number, it stops being a family matter and starts being a felony. And I'll do time. And there won't be anything left of me at the end of it." He let that sit. "You've never in your life wanted to be the reason something like that happened to somebody. That's not who you are. I know who you are better than anybody alive." And Josie stood there with her keys in her hand and understood, with a clarity that felt almost like relief, that he had come down here to do the only thing that had ever actually worked on her, which was to describe her to herself and then hand her the version he needed. "I'm filing it," she said. "What?" "The statement, the bank record, all of it. I'm giving it to them Monday morning." His face changed, and it changed fast, and for 1 second something looked out of it that she'd only ever seen behind a closed front door. "You don't want to do that." "I do. Josie, that record doesn't say what you think it says. That was a settlement negotiation. That's all that was. And if you file it out of context, they'll read it wrong, and I'll be finished over a paperwork problem. Then it won't hurt you. You're not listening. There were things I moved around in those years. Small things. Bridge stuff. To keep us afloat. And if somebody starts pulling on one end of that, they're going to pull the whole thing out. And there's paper on some of it. And I need..." And he stopped, because he heard himself. And he saw her face. And he understood a half-second too late that she hadn't been arguing with him. She had been letting him talk. "There's paper on some of it," she repeated. He took 1 step forward. Only one. And she reached back through the open window of her truck and put her hand on the horn and held it down. The sound in a concrete garage is an enormous thing. It went on, hammering off the pillars, and she watched him look at the ramp and then at the stairwell, and she kept her hand on it, and when the guard came out of the elevator lobby at a heavy jog with his flashlight already up, Brett Halloran was already walking fast toward the far exit with his collar turned. She gave the guard a description and a plate. Then she sat in her truck for a while. And this time she was not running out the clock. She was simply waiting for her hands to be steady enough to drive. She did file it Monday. And that same week, in a lawyer's office in Providence. The 3 consumer loan applications came back verified. All 3 in her name, all 3 signed in a hand that had copied hers with real care, and none of them, not one, ever seen by her before the night she opened the wrong box. She told him the rest of it at the kitchen table, late, after the cook had gone up and the house had gone quiet. And she told it once, straight through, the way a person reads out a document they've already decided not to be ashamed of. Her father left when she was small enough that she remembered the leaving mostly as a change in the sound of the apartment. Her mother worked 2 jobs for as long as Josie could remember, and never once said the word tired out loud. And there was a stretch of years in there that Josie could not have divided into individual months if her life depended on it, because they were all the same month, over and over. Her mother got sick when Josie was in her last year of school, and died a little after Josie turned 20. And it was slow, and it was expensive, and the hospital bills did what hospital bills in this country do, which is that they did not stay at the hospital. They were sold. They went to a collection company with a name like a law firm, and the collection company took her to court, and Josie, 20 years old, and standing in a courtroom without a lawyer, because she didn't know she was allowed to ask for one, agreed to something she didn't understand, and a judge signed it. And from that day her wages were garnished at every job she has ever held. That's why 3 jobs, she said. Everybody thinks it's ambition or panic. It isn't. It's arithmetic. A portion comes off the top of every check before I ever see it. And it has come off every check since I was 20. And after rent there was Bess. And Bess was 13. And into that, into a 20-year-old girl with a dead mother, a court order and a 13-year-old sister, came Brett Halloran, older, employed, unremarkable, kind in the way that reads as safety when you're that age and that frightened. And he looked at all of it and said 4 words. Let me handle it. You want to know the part I've never said to anybody? She said. Not to Bess. Not to a single friend I had left by then. She turned her cup around on the table. I wasn't fooled. That's the piece people get wrong when they hear this story. And it's the piece that's hardest to say out loud. I knew I didn't love him. I knew it the day he asked me. And I knew it walking down the aisle. And I knew it every year after. He wasn't a con man who tricked a naive girl. I was tired. And he was a door. And I walked through it with my eyes open. She looked up. I sold myself. Not for jewelry. Not for a house. For the end of being frightened about money for 1 single week. And I got exactly what I paid for. Which is that the fear about money stopped. And everything else started. And the whole time, there was a voice in me saying, you knew. And that voice is the reason it took 6 years. Because how do you leave something you chose? You can leave a man who lied to you. There's a shape to that. There's no shape at all for leaving something you agreed to. Elias didn't say anything. He had a way of not filling silences that she had stopped finding cold. And then, that Tuesday, she said, I was looking for the insurance card for the truck, because the registration was up and the card was never where it should be, and I went up on a chair and got down the shoebox off the top shelf of the closet, and it was the wrong box. She stopped. There was a letter in it from the collection company, addressed to him, dated years ago. Her hands went flat on the table. He'd settled it, years back. He negotiated the whole thing down and he paid it, and it was closed. And underneath that letter there was a bank statement, and the deduction was still coming off my checks every single pay period, and it was going into his account, and it had been going into his account the entire time. She pressed her palms harder against the wood. So every extra shift, every night run, all of it. I thought I was paying my mother's hospital. I was paying him. She stopped again, and this time it took her a while. That's the part I can't get around. Not the money. He knew what I thought that money was. He watched me come home at 2 in the morning and say that at least we were getting somewhere with it. And he agreed with me. And he said it would take a few more years. And he knew. And he let me thank him for it. She looked at the window and at the black glass, and at her own reflection sitting in the same chair. That's what was in the wrong box. That's the whole reason I ran down a hallway on the 18th floor. It wasn't the money and it wasn't the paperwork. It was that he let me be grateful. Bess Kearns came up the drive on a Saturday in somebody's borrowed car, and she was already crying when she got out of it. And she was crying because she was furious, which had been true of her since she was 9 years old. Is it true? She said. Before hello. Before anything. Because I've had 3 people send me the same picture of you walking through a hotel ballroom, and I want to hear it from you. Come inside. No. Tell me here. She stood on the gravel with her arms wrapped around herself. You left him. You left Brett. And everybody's saying you left him for... And she gestured at the house, at the whole silent, expensive weight of it. For this. And I keep telling them my sister isn't like that. and then I look at where you're standing. Josie didn't say anything. He put me through school, Josie. Her voice cracked on it. Do you understand that? Every year. He drove me back at the end of every break, and he never once made me feel like it was charity. And when Mom died, I was 13, and I had nothing and no one. And he wrote a check for a school with a name on it, and he called it an investment in me. He used that word, investment, in me. She was shaking, and he was good to me. Every single time I came home, he was good to me. He'd take us out. He'd ask about my classes. I never saw one bad thing. Not one. In 6 years. I know, Josie said. So what am I supposed to think? And Josie stood there, and could not make a single word come, because there was no sentence in the language that would carry it. Bess had gone to a good school. Bess had come home twice a year to 4 perfect days. And in that house, from that year on, there had been no one but Josie. That was the whole shape of it, and there was no way to hand it to a 19-year-old on a gravel driveway on a Saturday afternoon. It was Elias who came out. He didn't introduce himself, and he didn't apologize for interrupting. He had a folder in his hand, and he opened it on the hood of the borrowed car and put 3 sheets down on the metal, and he stepped back so he wasn't standing over them. You should read these before you say anything else, he said. They came back from a bank last week. Your sister has never seen any of them until this month. Bess looked at him, and then down at the papers, and Josie watched her read, and watched her get to the signature line on the first one, and watched her stop. She looked at it for a long time. Josie's signature, or something so close to it that it had passed at 3 separate institutions, on a loan she'd never applied for. Bess turned to the second page, then the third. Then she put both hands flat on the hood of the car, and stood there with her head down and her hair falling forward, and she made a small sound that had nothing to do with the anger she'd arrived with. There's more, Elias said quietly. It's her business to tell you or not. But these 3 are facts, and I'd rather you had them from paper than from a rumor. And then he went back inside, and left them there, which Josie would remember. Bess turned around. Her face was wrecked. How long? She said. All of it, Josie said. Since before you started school. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were 13. I was 19 last year too. Bess's voice came apart entirely. I was 19 and you still didn't tell me. And I sat at that table at Christmas and thanked him. I thanked him, Josie, in front of you. And you let me. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. If you had told me, I would have quit. Do you hear me? I'd have dropped out. I'd have come home and gotten a job and we'd have figured it out, both of us. And you wouldn't have had to. I know, Josie said. That's why I didn't. He did it on a Thursday, and he did it quietly. And she found out on Friday when the payroll office called her about a correction, and she stood in the hallway with the phone against her ear and heard a woman explain, in the pleasant voice of someone delivering good news, that the garnishment had been satisfied in full and would not appear on any future check. Josie thanked her. Then she went and found Elias in the study and shut the door behind her. Say it, she said. I paid it off. Say the rest. There is no rest. I had it satisfied. It's done. It's not a loan and I don't want it back, and I'd have done it the first week if I'd known how to do it without asking you. And Josie stood in the middle of that room and started to cry, which was not what either of them expected, and she was furious about the crying. Do you know what he said to me? She said. Do you know the exact words? Let me handle it. 4 words, and a check. And a girl who was too tired to ask what it cost. And I have spent 6 years finding out what 4 words cost. And I climbed out of it 3 months ago. And now you. She had to stop. You did the same thing. Better money, better reasons, same shape. You looked at my life and you fixed it without asking. And now I'm standing in your house owing you the one thing I said I would never owe anybody again. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that either. You're entirely right. And I'm not going to argue with you or explain myself, because the explaining is the part that does the damage. I made a decision about your life without you in the room. That's the whole offense, and there isn't a good version of it. He was quiet for a moment, and I understand something now that I didn't understand in that corridor. When I told you no about the 3 jobs, I thought I was arguing with pride. I wasn't. You weren't working 3 jobs because you refused help. You were working 3 jobs because a portion of every check had been going out the top since you were 20, and it was going to keep going out for years. And you had run the numbers, and that was the arithmetic. I was arguing with arithmetic, and calling it stubbornness. That was mine, and I take it back. It doesn't undo what you did. No. So tell me what would. Let me win the loan case myself. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Don't send lawyers to make it disappear. Don't settle it over my head. It's my name on those papers, and I'm going to be the one who takes it back. And if it takes 2 years, then it takes 2 years. Done. And don't give me anything else. Ever. If I stay in this house, I work for it. Real work. Not something invented to make me feel useful. So he gave her the household accounts. It was not invented work, and it was not glamorous work. It was the grocery orders, and the fuel, and the tradesmen, and the standing contracts for a large property that nobody had properly looked at in years. And he handed it over because it was genuinely a mess, and because she would take it, and she sat down with a year of it on the kitchen table and started reading. And here is a thing nobody tells you about living with a man who forged your signature at 3 banks over 6 years. You learn to read numbers, not from a class, from the specific and permanent habit of checking, of running your eye down a column looking for the thing that doesn't sit right, because you learned the hard way that documents lie in small, quiet ways, and the lie is always in the part nobody bothers to look at. She found it in the second week. 2 maintenance contracts on the glass house. 2, paid monthly, going back years, without interruption, to 2 separate companies for the upkeep of a building with half its panes out that nobody had walked into in a decade. One of them was Walt Brody's, small and plain, and exactly what it appeared to be. The other one had a name that sounded like a landscaping firm, and an address in a strip of offices in Warwick, and when she looked it up, there was no such company, and there never had been. She put both of them in front of Elias that evening. "I don't know anything about your business," she said, "and I don't want to. This isn't your business. This is the house." She tapped the second contract. "Somebody has been taking money out of this estate for years through a glass house that nobody sets foot in." She waited a beat. "Has it ever once occurred to you to ask why Mr. Brody has been out there alone all that time?" He didn't answer that. He looked at the paper for a long moment, and then he took both contracts and said he'd have Rocco run it down, because Rocco had handled the property accounts since his father died and would know where to start. And that night, at 1 a.m, she came down for water and found him still at the kitchen table in the dark, and she sat across from him and asked the question she'd been carrying since the dining room. "Have you ever done something," she said, "that if I knew about it, I'd have to leave?" "Yes. Don't soften it. I won't." He turned the glass slowly on the table. "Before I was 30, I did things I'm not going to describe to you. Not because I'm hiding them, because describing them is how a man asks to be forgiven, and I haven't earned the right to ask you for that." He said it without any weight at all. "People lost a great deal because of me. None of them were bystanders, and that doesn't make it lighter. It only makes it explicable, and explicable is not the same as clean." He looked up. "My father had a line he used on me my whole life. Anything you love is a debt, and someone will come to collect it. I built everything I am on that sentence, and the things I did before I was 30 are what a man does when he believes it. So if you need to go, go tonight. I'll drive you myself and I won't ask where." Josie sat with that for a long while. "I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter," she said at last. "It matters. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I heard something small." She wrapped both hands around the glass. "But I lived 6 years with a man who never did anything close to that, and took me apart anyway, one quiet piece at a time, and never once told me a true thing at 1 a.m. when it might have cost him something. And you just did." She looked at him. "I'm not staying because I'm forgiving the first part. I'm staying because of the second." The girl came up the drive on a weekday afternoon in a car that was clearly not hers, parked it badly, and stood at the front of the house for a while before she got as far as the bell, and Josie, who happened to be crossing the hall, opened the door herself. She was 17 or thereabouts, dark-haired, in a school jacket, holding a folded page in both hands, the way you hold something you've been holding for hours. "I'm looking for Elias Marchetti," she said. "Is he here?" "He is. Who should I say?" And the girl said, Nell Marchetti. "I'm Aldo's daughter," and something in the way she said the second sentence, as though she'd had to practice saying it to strangers her whole life, made Josie step back from the door, instead of turning around to call down the hall. "Have you eaten?" "What?" "You've driven from somewhere. Have you eaten anything today?" "I don't," Nell said, and then, "No." "Then come and sit in the kitchen." She put the girl at the table where the light was, and made her a sandwich, and poured her milk, because she looked about 9 years old under the jacket, and she didn't ask a single question until the plate was half gone. Then she sat down across from her. "Before I go and get him," Josie said, "I want you to decide something, and whatever you decide is fine with me. Do you want to see your uncle, or do you want to ask me your question and go home? Because both of those are all right. I'm not going to walk you into a room you didn't choose to walk into. If you want to leave in 10 minutes, I'll take your plate and wave you off, and he'll never know you were here." Nell looked at her for a long moment, the way a person looks when nobody has offered them an exit before. Then she unfolded the page and slid it across the table. It was a photocopy, a woman's handwriting, an ordinary page from what must have been a household notebook. and there were 4 or 5 lines of it, dated across different months and years. Thank you, Mr. Brody. Another month. Thank you, Mr. Brody. Again this month, God bless him. That's my mom's writing, Nell said. She died 2 years ago. I've been going through her things since. And there's pages and pages of that, going back to when I was small. And I don't know who Mr. Brody is. Nobody I ask knows. And every single one of those pages has your family's name somewhere in the same notebook. Her chin came up. So that's my question. Who is he? That's all I came for. And Josie was still looking at the page when she felt the change in the room, and she raised her head, and Elias was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had gone completely still. He was looking at the girl at his kitchen table, at the shape of her face, and Josie watched a man she had seen frightened exactly once look at a 17-year-old with a milk glass and go white to the mouth, and then he turned and walked out. Nell's whole body flinched. Josie heard his footsteps go 3 or 4 paces down the hall and stop, stand there, and she made herself stay in her chair and say nothing at all, because there are doors a person has to come back through on their own, or they haven't come back through them. It took a while. Then the footsteps came again, slower, and he came into the kitchen and pulled out the chair across from his brother's child and sat down in it, and he put his hands flat on the table, like a man steadying himself against weather. Nell, he said. Yes, I'm sorry. I needed a minute. It's fine. It isn't. He looked at her. You have his face. I wasn't ready for that. And that isn't your fault. And I've just done to you at my own table the exact thing I've done to you for 9 years, which is walk out of the room. Nell's hands were flat on the table too now, mirroring him without either of them noticing. Can I say something? She said. Yes. Everybody thinks I don't know what my dad was. Her voice was very steady, and it was the steadiness that made it terrible. I know. I've known since I was about 11. I know what he did, and I know who he did it for. And I know that the family had a lot of money, and my mom cleaned other people's houses. I worked all that out on my own. I'm not stupid. You're not. So all these years, and here the steadiness went. I never once thought it was because of my dad. That's what I need you to understand. Because I think you've been assuming it was. I never thought you stayed away because of what happened to him. Her eyes had filled and she didn't wipe them. I thought it was because of me. Elias didn't move. I thought there was something about me, Nell said. Because you knew I existed. Everybody knew I existed. And nobody came. Not for the first day of school. Not when I was sick. Not when Mom died. Not one time. And when you're small, you don't think a grown man is staying away because he's ashamed of himself. You think he looked at you and decided he didn't want you. She was crying properly now. That's what I've been carrying. Not my dad. Me. And I drove down here today to ask about a man named Brody. And I'm telling you the other thing instead. And I don't know why. And Elias Marchetti, who had built an entire life out of never opening anything, reached across his own kitchen table and put his hand over his brother's daughter's hand, and could not speak, and did not try to. She found him that night in the glass house, sitting on an upturned crate in the dark with the rain coming down hard on what was left of the roof, and coming through in 3 places, and she took the crate opposite, and sat with him a long while before she said anything at all. Who taught you, she said finally, that it isn't safe to be seen being kind? Because you've been doing it since the first minute I met you. You make a dry joke instead of a kind one. You move a delivery time and don't tell anyone why. Somebody taught you that, and I'd like to know who. The rain filled the silence for a while. My father, he said. My mother died when I was 11. At the funeral I started crying, and he put his hand on the back of my neck. And afterward in the car he explained to me what my mistake had been. Not that she was gone, that I'd let it be seen. He watched the water run down a broken pane. He had a line. Anything you love is a debt, and someone will come to collect it. He said it to me the way other fathers say be home by dark. He turned the words over, and he meant it as a kindness. That's what I want you to understand about him. He wasn't cruel for pleasure. He honestly believed he was handing me a tool that would keep me alive, and in his world he wasn't entirely wrong, and that's what makes it so hard to put down. He was quiet a moment. He taught me to keep a ledger, not a business ledger. Everything. Who did you a favor? What it cost? What they could ask for later? If a man bought me lunch, I was made to work out what he'd want in return. By the time I was 12, I couldn't accept a glass of water without opening an account. The rain came harder. And then when I was 25, I met a woman and I put the ledger down. All of it. At once. The way you do at that age. I told her everything I knew. Where things were, who was where, what was moving and when. I don't say she took it from me. I handed it over across a table with both hands. And I did it because I was so relieved to finally be somebody who talked. He stopped for longer than she expected. And then we buried Aldo, he said. And that was all he said about it. Josie didn't fill it. So I closed it again, he said. Everything. And I told myself my father had been right the whole time. And that the one occasion in my life I opened it, the bill came. Exactly as promised. And I've lived inside that sentence ever since. He looked at his hands. But that's not the worst of it. And I'd rather you had the worst of it than the version that makes me look tragic, he said the next part flatly, without any protection at all. When my father died and I took over, somebody had to see to Aldo's family. His widow asked me at the funeral not to come near the child. She said she didn't want a girl growing up having to decide whether to love me or hate me. And she was right. And I agreed. So I turned to Rocco and I said, "See that they're looked after." One sentence. One time. He lifted his head. And I never asked again. Not once. In 9 years. Not a question. Not a figure. Not a Christmas. And Josie. I wasn't deceived. Nobody hid anything from me. I didn't check. And I know exactly why I didn't check. Because to check, I'd have had to think about it. And thinking about it was the one thing I could not make myself do. So I said a sentence and let it stand in for a person. And I sat in this house eating dinner while that girl grew up thinking there was something wrong with her. His voice didn't break. It went very quiet, which was worse. My father built a man who could do that. Not a violent man. Any fool can build one of those. He built a man who could not look. And Josie got up off the crate and knelt down on the cracked floor of that glass house in front of him and took both his hands in both of hers, and they were cold, and hers weren't. "Your father was wrong," she said. "Not partly. Wrong. Anything you love is not a debt, and nobody comes to collect it. And the proof of that is sitting out there in a parked car every time Nell drives home, because she has spent 9 years loving a man she'd never met, and not one single person has ever come to collect on it. It just sat there and cost her. That's what love actually does when you refuse it. It doesn't get taken. It goes nowhere and it rots." She held on. And he wasn't strong, Elias. He was terrified. He was so frightened of losing anything that he decided in advance to have nothing. And then he called that discipline. And then he set about making certain his son would be as frightened as he was, because a frozen man can't stand the sight of warmth, least of all in his own child. She felt his hands move slightly in hers. "I'm not asking you to open it. Not tonight. Not this month. It's been welded shut since you were 11, and I'm not fool enough to think that comes apart because a woman said something nice to you in a greenhouse in the rain." She looked up at him. "I'm asking one thing. There's a crack in it now. You know there is. Don't weld it back up. Leave it. Let me stand at it. And we'll find out slowly, the way we agreed, whether the person on this side of it is somebody who came to collect." The rain went on, and neither of them moved. "Take as long as it takes," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. That's the part your father never learned. Some people just stay." Rocco came back to him inside the week and said there was nothing in it. He said the second company was a shell somebody had set up years ago for a tax reason nobody remembered, that the payments were an accounting habit that had never been cleaned up, that he'd walked the whole thing back himself, and it went nowhere and died. He said it standing in the study with his hat in his hand, in the voice of a man who had done a tedious favor, and Elias thanked him and put the 2 contracts back in the drawer, and Josie, who was not in the room, heard about it that evening and said only that it was strange for an accounting habit to have an address in Warwick, and then let it go, because she had promised not to touch his business, and she meant it. The glass house was broken up that night. Nobody was inside it. Whoever came did it late, after the house had gone dark, and they did it thoroughly and quietly, and by morning almost every pane that had survived 30 winters was on the floor in pieces, and the long bench was over, and the pots were split open along the whole row. Josie came out at first light because the cook had told her, and stopped at the door, and did not go in. Old Walt Brodie was already inside. He was down on both knees in all that broken glass, in the wet, with his hands black to the wrist, working through the spilled earth in slow, careful sweeps, and the lemon tree was over on its side beside him with the root ball out, and he had got a wooden crate under it, and was easing it upright a little at a time, the way you would move somebody with a bad back. He didn't look up and he didn't say anything at all, and Josie watched him for a while and understood, without being able to say how she knew, that a man salvaging a tree does not sift the soil like that, in rows, with his eyes down, looking. She went to find Elias, and she was already too late. He was in the courtyard with his coat on, and the car was running, and 2 men were in it, and he was standing at the open door, with his phone in his hand, and Josie came around the corner and saw his face and stopped dead, because for about 3 seconds she did not know the man she was looking at. It was not rage. She had lived with rage, and rage is loud and sloppy, and asks for an audience. This was the other thing, the thing the men in the dining room had stood up for. the thing the whole city apparently understood without ever having seen it, and it was quiet and entirely at rest, and it had already made up its mind. "Elias," she said. He didn't turn. "Elias." He turned, and she didn't reach for a reason or an argument, because there wasn't time and because reasons are no good at that distance. "If you settle this the way your father would have settled it," she said, "then they've won tonight, and you'll have handed it to them for free." He stood there with the door open and the engine running. Whatever that was in there, it wasn't about a tree. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the phone and said something short to the men in the car, and they got out, and the engine went off, and the courtyard was very quiet, and Josie realized her legs were shaking. He came over and stopped in front of her, and when he spoke his voice was not steady, which she had never once heard. "You saw it," he said. "Yes. Then I'm going to tell you the true thing and you can do whatever you like with it." He looked past her toward the wall and the broken glass beyond it. "Everything I've said to you in this house about being finished with that, about the ledger, about being a different man than the one I was before 30. I meant all of it when I said it." He put his hands in his pockets. "But it hasn't gone anywhere, Josie. That's what I need you to understand, and that's what I've been afraid to say out loud. It didn't leave. It's just sitting down." They reglazed the glass house over those weeks, and Walt worked in it every day without ever once mentioning what had happened to it. And then at the very end of spring, he came up to the house before daylight and knocked on the kitchen door hard enough to wake the whole back wing. And when Josie opened it, the old man could barely get the words out. "Come down," he said. "Just come down." The smell reached them halfway across the lawn. The lemon tree had come into flower, the whole crown of it, white and heavy, and the scent had filled that glass room the way water fills a jar, and it was the first time in more years than Walt could put a number to. The cook came down in her coat with a pot of coffee and cups, and the driver came, and the man who did the grounds, and they stood about in the wet grass in the half-dark drinking coffee out of the house's good china, because nobody had thought to bring the other kind, and Elias stood in the middle of them. He stood there among people whose names he had not known at the start of that year, holding a cup somebody had put into his hand, looking at a tree in flower, and after a while he turned and looked out at the water instead, and kept looking at it for some time, and nobody said anything to him about it. That evening in the kitchen, with the flowers still on her hands, Josie said it without meaning to. "I love you." And then, immediately, because she saw his face, "You don't have to answer that. I'm not asking for anything, and I'd rather you said nothing at all than said it back tonight to be kind. I didn't plan it. It just came out." He stood absolutely still in the middle of his own kitchen for a very long moment. Then he said, "Say it again." She was still finding the breath for it when the phone rang in the hall. The indictment came down against Brett Halloran that same week, and his attorney went looking for the only currency his client had left. And it turned out that Brett Halloran had exactly one thing to sell, which was that his wife had been living inside the Marchetti house since winter. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday, federal grand jury. Josie read it twice, standing in the front hall, and then sat down on the stairs. By evening, the family lawyer was at the house, and Rocco was there, and Teresa Marchetti had come out from Providence with her cane, and they put it to her plainly at the dining table. She would be asked what she had done in that house, and the answer was that she had run the household accounts, the groceries and the fuel and the tradesmen. And that was true, and it was very nearly the whole truth, and all it required was that she not volunteer 2 maintenance contracts on a glass house. "It's not a lie," the lawyer said. "It's a scope. You answer what you're asked." "You've been in this house 4 months, Rocco said. "You owe it that much." And the old woman put both hands on the head of her cane and said, "The girl will do what's sensible," in a tone that closed the subject. And every person at that table nodded, and Josie sat there with the paper in front of her, and felt the room settle around a decision that had been made without her. And then Elias said, "No." They all looked at him. "She tells them everything," he said. "Every question they ask, she answers all the way to the bottom of it. And she doesn't leave out the contracts. And she doesn't leave out anything else either." Rocco's chair scraped. "Do you understand what you're saying?" "I understand exactly what I'm saying." He wasn't looking at his uncle. He was looking at Josie. "If it buries me, it buries me. You tell them the truth." Rocco didn't invent anything. That was the craft of it. He came to his nephew 2 nights later and laid 3 true facts on the table and let them sit there touching each other. A federal grand jury wanted her. She was a defendant in an open case with an interest in cooperating. She had arrived in this house by accident on the one night of the year the 18th floor was closed, and she had asked for the household accounts herself, and within weeks she had come to him holding 2 contracts. "I'm not telling you what to think," Rocco said. "I'm telling you what it looks like laid out. You can do the rest yourself. You always could. And Elias did the rest himself. Which was the point. He didn't decide to. He sat in the study after his uncle had gone and felt the whole apparatus come back on. The thing his father had built in him before he was 12, moving faster than any thought of his could get in front of, and by morning it had closed. Josie came in at 7 and saw it in his face, before he said a word. The shut gate. The man from the dark room, back entire. He told her what had been said. He didn't accuse her of anything. He simply put it out, and then asked her, in a voice she'd never heard him use with her, to tell him who she was. And Josie understood the shape of the trap in the first 3 seconds. Because if she swore she loved him, then she was doing exactly what a woman who had been placed in this house would do. And he would never for the rest of his life be able to tell the difference, and the doubt would sit down in him and start welding. So she did the other thing. Then we're finished, she said. Say that again. We're done. Today. She took the ring of house keys out of her pocket and set them on the desk, and the folder of the household accounts, squared up, every receipt in order. Then she took out her phone, unlocked it, and put it down beside the keys with the screen still lit. Give that to whoever you use. All of it. The messages, the call log, the bank. If there's something in there, I want you to find it. If there's nothing in there, I want you to find that too. And I want you to find it after I'm gone, so you can never tell yourself I stayed around to manage what you saw. Josie, I'm not taking one thing out of this house that I didn't bring into it. Where are you going? He stood up. You have nowhere to go. 3 landlords in 3 weeks. And you have no savings because the money went where the money went. And I know all of it because I checked. That, she said, is not your business anymore. And she looked at him levelly. That's the entire thing I'm taking back. I spent 6 years staying in a house because I had nowhere else to be. And I told myself the whole time that it was love. And I have promised myself I will never do it again. Not for a bad man, and not for a good one. She picked up her bag. I'd rather sleep in somebody's spare room than stay somewhere I have to be believed. And she walked out, and she did not stop at the door, and she was gone. She slept 3 nights on the couch of a woman named Denise, who drove the same night route out of the same depot and asked no questions beyond whether she took sugar. And in those 3 days, at the house in Newport, the other thing came apart. It was the driver who said it, offhand, not knowing what he was holding, that it was a pity about those rooms she'd tried to take in the winter, and that Mrs. Marchetti had been very quick about it. Elias went to Providence that afternoon. His grandmother didn't deny one syllable of it. She sat with both hands on her cane and said yes. She had made 3 telephone calls, to 3 people whose families had known hers for 50 years, and that a room was a small thing to ask of an old friend. You made her homeless, he said. I made her stand still, Teresa said. She was going to work herself into the ground in a rented room over a dry cleaner and be gone out of your life by Easter, and you'd have gone back to sitting in the dark, and I am too old to wait for 2 frightened people to find their own way to a decision. She lifted her chin. I'm not going to apologize to you. I'll apologize to her, if she'll have it, and she may not. And Elias Marchetti raised his voice to his grandmother for the first time in his life, in that front room. And it went on for some while, and when he had finished, she simply looked at him and said that he had never once, in 34 years, shouted at anybody about anything, and that she was glad to have lived to hear it, because it meant something had finally gotten in. He called Josie from the car. He told her all of it because he had promised himself in the study that morning, after she'd walked out, that he would never again let a piece of information about her life reach him before it reached her. And there was a long silence on the line, and then Josie said, She did what she thought would save you. A pause. Does that sound like anybody else you know? Nell drove down again on the Saturday, because nobody had ever answered her question. She came into the study with the whole notebook this time, not the photocopy, her mother's actual notebook with the soft cover and the years of household arithmetic in it, and she put it on the desk in front of her uncle and said, You still haven't told me who Mr. Brody is. And Elias looked down at his brother's widow's handwriting. Thank you, Mr. Brody. Another month. Thank you, Mr. Brody. Again this month. God bless him. Going back page after page after page, month after month, year after year, and he sat there while the floor of his life quietly gave way underneath him. He went out to the glass house. Walt Brody was in there in the new glass with his hands in a seed tray, and he looked up, and whatever was in Elias's face, the old man read it instantly, and he did not run, and he did not deny, and he did not ask a single question. He wiped his hands on his trousers. He went to the corner where the pots were stacked, and reached behind them, and brought out a biscuit tin, dented, the lid held on with a rubber band. He put it on the bench between them. "You can call the police," he said. "I'm too old for it to matter much. But look in the tin first." Inside were receipts. Every one. Money orders, tuition confirmations, a dentist, a winter coat, a payment book from a landlord in Cranston, bank slips, all of it in order. Oldest at the bottom, going back to the year Elias's father died. Not 1 month missing. And every single one of them made out to Aldo's widow and then, later, to a girl at a school. Not $1 of it anywhere else. Not one. When your father passed, Walt said, and things got looked at, the money for Aldo's family got taken off the list. I heard it happen. I was carrying a tray. Your uncle called it a line that wasn't earning. He said it without heat, the way a man reports weather from a long time ago. I'd known Aldo since he was a boy. He used to come out here and hide from his own father. And that girl was 6 years old. He put one finger on the edge of the tin. "I'm nobody, Mr. Marchetti. I don't have any standing. Nobody in this house was going to take a word from me over a word from him." He shrugged very slightly. "So I did the one thing a man like me can do. There's a building on this property that nobody has walked into in 10 years. So I put a contract on it. And every month I took what that fake contract paid and I sent it where it was supposed to go. And I have never in my life spent 1 cent of it on myself. And that's what's in the tin, and you can count it." Elias stood there with his hands at his sides. "Why didn't you come to me?" And the old man looked at him. And there was nothing in his face that was trying to wound. "I did come to you," he said. Elias didn't speak. 3 times. Walt's voice didn't change. "The first time was that winter. I got up to the house, and the fellow at the door gave me a book and told me to put my name in it, and somebody would call me. So I put my name in it. The second time was maybe 2 years on, when the school wanted more than I could pull that month, and I put my name in the book again. And the third time was after her mother got sick." He looked down at the bench. "Nobody ever called. That's all it is. I'm not saying it to shame you. There's a book by that door, and my name's in it 3 times and nobody ever called. And after the third one I stopped going up, because a man only makes that walk so many times." And Elias Marchetti stood in a rebuilt glass house in front of a biscuit tin and understood, with a completeness that took the breath out of him, that he had not been deceived by anybody, that there had been no scheme against him, that for 9 years the person who had kept the one promise made over his brother's grave was the only person on the property whose name he had never bothered to learn, and that he had learned it at last because a delivery driver had asked the old man a question in a ruined greenhouse, and then stood there and cried about a tree, and that the last piece of it had been carried up his own driveway by a 17-year-old girl who had no idea what she was holding, and that all 3 of them, every one, were people he had walked past his entire life without seeing. He put his hand on the bench to steady himself. "Mr. Brody," he said, "sit down, please. I need to ask you some things, and I don't want you standing up while I do it." He called them all to the house on the Sunday, the way it had been done every Sunday since before he was born, and Rocco was seated where Rocco had always been seated, at his nephew's right hand, and the wine was poured for him the same as for everybody else. Then Elias said, "Nobody speaks until I've finished," and began. He laid it out in order, and without any adornment at all. The line that had been cut the year his father died, and what had been said about it, and what it had actually been, the years that followed, the 3 telephone calls that were not his grandmother's, and the room over the dry cleaner, and the valve stem, the report that had come back saying there was nothing in it, the night the glass came down, and what a man had been kneeling in the next morning, looking for, and the tin. He put the tin on the table. He did not open it. Rocco sat through all of it with his hands flat on the cloth, and did not once try to speak, which told everybody at that table more than any denial would have. "Here's what happens," Elias said. "You keep the name. Nobody takes that off you, and I won't have it said in this family that we stripped an old man. You keep your money, every dollar of it, paid the first of the month for the rest of your life, and if you outlive me, it comes out of my estate first, before my own children." He let that sit. "You lose 3 things. You never decide anything again. You don't set foot in this state, not for a funeral, not for a wedding, not for mine. And nobody at this table takes your call. Not one of them, ever. And every person here has just heard me say it." He looked at his uncle for the first time. "You'll live a long time, comfortable, and no one will need you. My father would have done something else. I'm not my father. I'm going to let you sit in it." Rocco stood up. He looked around the table, at every face, and every face looked back at him, and nobody rose, and nobody put out a hand, and he went out through the hall and the front door closed, and that was the whole of it. Then Elias said, "One more thing before anyone eats." He nodded toward the door, and Walt Brody came in a jacket that had been in a press for 20 years, holding his cap. For 9 years, Elias said. The only person in this house who kept the promise we made at Aldo's grave was the only person in this house whose name I never learned. He'll be sitting at this table from now on. If that's difficult for anyone, they're free to stand up now. Nobody stood up. Josie testified that Thursday. They asked her what she had done in the household of Elias Marchetti, and she told them all of it, from the grocery orders to the fuel invoices to the tradesmen to the 2 maintenance contracts on a glass house that nobody had walked into in a decade, and where the second one went, and who had been asked to look into it, and what had come back. She left nothing out, and every road that led out of what she said went to one man, and none of them went to Elias, so that in the end, the only thing her testimony buried was the person who had built the story that she was there to bury him. He was waiting outside when she came out. I know what you're going to say, she said. I don't think you do. He stood on the step below hers, which put them eye to eye. You were right about every single part of it, except the conclusion. You were right that a woman who'd been put in my house would have sworn she loved me, and right that I'd never have been able to tell the difference, and right that I'd have carried the doubt until it killed whatever this was. He shook his head slowly. But you were wrong that you had to actually walk out the door. The proof wasn't in the leaving. The proof was in the offering. You put your keys and your phone on my desk and asked me to search you after you were gone, and there is no version of a liar who does that. And you did it in about 4 seconds without thinking, and it's already done. You can't take it back. It's mine now, permanently, and no story anybody tells me for the rest of my life can reach it. He put his hands in his pockets. So the door has done its work, and you never have to open it again. Elias, I'm not leaving the crack open anymore. He said it very simply. That's what I came to tell you. I'm not doing the ledger. Not a smaller one. Not a careful one. The whole thing goes, today, and I'm not building another. My father was wrong, and he was wrong in the most expensive possible way, because the one thing his system was designed to keep out was a person who came to give something back, and it turns out that's the only kind of person who's ever come. The divorce was final in the fall, and they were married in the glass house the following September, in the new glass, and the lemon tree had fruit on it that year for the first time in longer than Walt Brody could put a number to, and Josie carried a single sprig of it up the aisle, instead of anything a florist could have sold her. Nell read at the ceremony. She stood up in front of everybody and read something she'd written herself about a man in a jacket that had been in a press for 20 years, and she got most of the way through it before her voice went, and Walt sat in the front row with his cap in both hands and looked at the floor the entire time. The front rows were the cook and the driver and the woman who came Tuesdays and the man who did the grounds, because Josie had said, plainly and more than once, that she was not going to be married in a room full of people whose names she didn't know, while the people who actually made that house a house stood outside in the sun, and the great families of 3 counties could sit farther back or not come at all. And sometime that same autumn, the enormous desk that had belonged to Elias's father went down to the basement, and in the space where it had stood for 42 years, they put the lemon in its clay pot, where the light was best. The boy came along after that. Sam was 7 years old the afternoon it happened, and by then he had a job, which was that he helped Mr. Brody in the glass house every day after school, and he was more proud of that job than of anything else in his life. He was carrying a tray that was slightly too big for him. He caught the corner of the bench, and the tray went, and a pot went with it, and one of the lower branches of the lemon tree came away in the middle of the mess. Nobody scolded him. Walt said only, "Oh, now," and reached for the branch. But Sam had already gone, out the door and up across the lawn and into the house, and his father found him a long while later sitting on the floor of the upstairs hallway, with his back against the wall and his face in his knees, crying the way children cry when they believe the damage is permanent. Elias stood over him and felt it rise. His father's voice, exactly on schedule, offering him the sentence he had spent 7 years dreading, telling him that a boy should be taught not to weep over a plant, that the world would harden the child soon enough, and better it come from a father who loved him. He had been afraid of that voice since before the boy was born. He had lain awake with it. He had told Josie once, in the dark, that the cold in his family was not a habit but an inheritance, and that he was terrified he would hand it on without ever noticing he was doing it, and she had said that the men who did that were never once afraid of it, and that his fear was the proof he wouldn't. He recognized the voice as his father's, and he sat down on the floor. He put his back against the same wall and gathered his son up against his chest and let him cry. "It hurts because you love it," he said into the boy's hair. "That's all the hurt is. It's love with nowhere to go, and there's nothing shameful in it. And I don't ever want you to let anybody tell you there is. Somebody told me that when I was younger than you are, and he was wrong, and it took me most of my life to find out he was wrong, and I am not going to let it take you that long." They sat there a good while. Then they went back down to the glass house together, and Walt Brody had already put the broken branch in a jar of water on the bench, and he showed the boy how you take a piece like that and cut it clean and set it in sand, and how if you're patient and you don't fuss at it, that piece will put out roots of its own and become an entirely separate tree. Sam potted it himself. He checked it every single day for a year, and it took, and it grew, and by the time he was grown, there were 2 lemon trees at that house instead of 1. They were very old when he took her back to the 18th floor. He had bought the hotel years before, and had never let anyone touch that particular suite, and the chair by the window was the same chair, and there was a lamp on now, and he lowered himself into it slowly, the way he had lowered himself into it a lifetime ago, and he looked up at his wife standing in the light, and said the first thing he had ever said to her, word for word, and she said it along with him, and did not miss a syllable. Then she put her hand on his shoulder, and looked at the window for a while. "I used to frighten myself thinking about how nearly it never happened," she said. "One different hallway, one different door, but I stopped, because the accident only ever put 2 people in the same room. It didn't learn anybody's name. It didn't sit down on a hallway floor with a crying boy. It didn't put down a ledger that 3 generations of your family had been carrying. We did those, every one of them, on purpose, one day at a time, for 50 years. And he didn't answer her, because there wasn't anything to add, so he only reached up and took her hand and held it. Here is what their life has to teach anyone who has heard it. Kindness is not weakness, and the men who taught us otherwise were frightened, not strong. The measure of a person is never the power they hold, but whether they trouble to learn the name of the one who waters the tree. And nothing in this world that truly changes a life ever arrives on schedule, but what we build afterward, deliberately, day after ordinary day, is the sturdiest thing there is. If this story reached something in you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, because your support is what lets us keep bringing you stories like this one every day. We would truly love to know how this one landed with you, so tell us in the comments what part stayed with you and what you felt, because we read them and they mean a great deal to us. Wishing every one of you watching good health, peace, and quiet joy in your days. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.